Medieval cities hide a secret mathematical soul beneath their cobblestone skin. We are taught to see these ancient urban centers as chaotic mazes, the messy result of slow, unplanned growth. But what if the opposite is true? This journey will reveal how the layouts of these towns were actually sophisticated blueprints governed by precise geometric principles. You will learn to see the hidden order in the winding streets, a code that reveals how our ancestors used mathematics to shape their world for defense, faith, and commerce. How did a marketplace become a geometric nexus? Why were cathedral spires placed with the precision of astronomical instruments? By the end, you will possess a new lens to view history, one that deciphers the forgotten science etched into the very ground we walk on. What forgotten patterns do you suppose are hidden in the oldest city you have ever visited? A Roman soldier stationed in Timgad would have known his place in the world with absolute certainty. His city was a perfect grid of straight avenues, the Cardo and Decumanus crossing at a precise right angle to divide the urban space into uniform blocks. This was order imposed from above, a blueprint for military control and administrative efficiency that could be stamped onto any landscape, anywhere in the empire. It was a geometry of power. Then the empire receded. Walk the streets of a town that grew centuries later, and the experience is completely different. You are met not with straight lines, but with a labyrinth of curving lanes that seem to follow the roll of the land, narrowing and widening without an obvious pattern. For a long time, we misinterpreted this shift as a descent into chaos, a loss of classical knowledge, but that is a profound misunderstanding. The medieval town did not abandon mathematical planning. It simply exchanged one type of order for another, trading the imperial grid for a more complex, organic system. This new system was not imposed by a distant emperor, but grew from the ground up, shaped by the logic of local geography, the divisions of feudal land grants, and the flow of pilgrims and merchants. Its geometry was not one of rigid right angles, but of radial divisions spiraling out from a central point, of subtle curves that accommodated topography, and of key structures placed with symbolic intent. This transition from a top-down grid to a bottom-up web is the essential first step to understanding the medieval city's unique mathematical soul. And to decipher that soul, we must start at its vibrant, beating heart, the marketplace. That marketplace, a perfect rectangle of packed earth and cobblestones, was far more than a place of trade. Its very shape was a mathematical declaration. When a new town was charted, surveyors would first lay out this central space, often using ropes and stakes to ensure its sides adhered to a simple ratio, like 1:2 or 2:3. These harmonious proportions were believed to reflect a divine order, a balance that was both practical and symbolic. From this geometric anchor, the entire town was literally measured out. The main streets leading directly to the square were like spokes on a wheel, ensuring that all commercial and civic life flowed through this central hub. The town hall and the main church were positioned for maximum visibility and access, their placement calculated using lines of sight from the market's boundaries. Even the long, narrow plots of land for the townsfolk's homes and workshops, known as Burgage plots, were often standardized modules whose dimensions were derived from the square itself. This created a coherent, scalable system of urban development, all radiating from that single, calculated space. But while the marketplace anchored the town's commercial body, another structure was plotting its sacred soul against the heavens themselves. While the marketplace anchored the town's economic life, the cathedral spire reached for the heavens, serving as the community's spiritual compass. Its placement was never accidental, but a profound act of mathematical and theological statement. Planners employed sacred geometry, using constructions like the vesica piscis, an almond shape formed by two overlapping circles, to determine the church's footprint and orientation. This shape, rich with symbolic meaning, was believed to represent the intersection of the divine and the mortal realms. The entire building was often laid out within an invisible geometric framework, perhaps a circle inscribed within a square, tying its dimensions to cosmic proportions. This mathematical intent extended to celestial alignment. The high altar was frequently positioned so that on the feast day of the town's patron saint, the rays of the rising sun would shine directly down the central aisle, illuminating the sacred space. This was astronomy made manifest in urban design, a calendar built in stone. From this calculated center, the cathedral's tower exerted a powerful visual pull. Major streets were deliberately aligned to frame the spire at their terminus, creating long, deliberate sightlines that carved an invisible order from the seemingly chaotic urban fabric. Every time a citizen walked these streets, their gaze was drawn upward, physically and symbolically connecting the daily life of the earthly city to the divine cosmos. This sacred geometry provided a spiritual defense, but the town's physical survival depended on another layer of mathematical cunning, one etched into the path of its protective walls. The cathedral's spire was a beacon of order, but the city walls were a labyrinth of calculated chaos. These fortifications were far more than a simple barrier. They were a masterclass in applied geometry. The ideal defensive wall was not a perfect circle, but a multi-sided polygon. Each straight section between towers was a chord of a vast, invisible circle, its length carefully calculated. Why a polygon? Because this shape allowed defenders in adjacent towers to create overlapping fields of fire. An attacker attempting to scale one wall segment would find themselves exposed to archers in not one, but two towers, their arrows converging in a deadly crossfire. This entire system was based on the mathematics of angles and sightlines, a defensive calculus etched in stone. This mathematical thinking extended inward, shaping the very streets. Look at the paths leading from the main gates toward the city center. You will rarely find a straight, welcoming boulevard. Instead, these routes are deliberately kinked, curved, or staggered. This was not poor planning, it was a brilliant defensive innovation. A straight street offers a clear line of sight and a fast path for a charging enemy. But a bent street becomes a trap. It forces invaders to slow down, breaking their formation as they navigate each turn. More importantly, it eliminates long, clear sightlines for enemy archers or, in later periods, for cannon fire. Each corner created a new ambush point, a killing zone where defenders could attack from protected positions. The entire urban network was designed as a series of these fatal funnels, turning the city itself into a weapon against any who breached the outer walls. This martial geometry, so focused on controlling movement and visibility, inevitably shaped the quieter, more intimate spaces where people made their homes. Yet, even within the defensive tangle of streets, a remarkable consistency governed where people lived and worked. Look past the varied facades of houses along a main street, and you will discover a hidden mathematical module repeating over and over again. This was the Burgage plot system, the very DNA of the medieval town's residential fabric. These were long, narrow strips of land, each one extending back from a fixed width of street frontage. The width of your plot was not arbitrary. It was typically a standard measurement, perhaps one rod or one perch, a local unit that ensured fairness. The depth of the plot was then often a multiple of this same unit. What appears from the main road as a charmingly irregular line of buildings is actually the front edge of a deeply orderly system. Behind the street, the town was composed of these uniform, parallel strips, a private grid of land dedicated to homes, workshops, gardens, and animal pens. This modular planning was a stroke of genius. It allowed town founders to parcel out land in a way that was perceived as equitable, simplifying both initial allocation and ongoing taxation. It also created a predictable framework for growth, as new streets could be laid out with the same repeating module, ensuring efficient use of space. This was applied mathematics at the most personal level, shaping the daily environment of every craftsman and merchant. And this very same principle of systematic, measured division was simultaneously being applied to the fields and common lands that surrounded the town walls. But that same mathematical logic governing the Burgage plots extended far beyond the city walls, into the very fields that fed the population. The division of common fields followed a system of long, narrow strips, a pattern still visible in the landscape today. This was not a random scattering of plots, but a carefully measured distribution designed to ensure each family had a fair share of both good and poor soil. The layout was a geometric solution to the problem of equitable resource allocation, a rural echo of the urban order. And just as the fields were planned to manage the Earth's fertility, the city itself was engineered to control its most vital resource, water. This was a challenge that demanded not just planning, but a sophisticated understanding of mathematics and physics. The lifeblood of a medieval city was its water, and managing its flow was a matter of survival. Engineers had to perform precise calculations to establish the gentle, consistent gradients needed for aqueducts and drainage ditches. A slope too steep would cause destructive erosion, while one too shallow would allow water to stagnate, creating a health hazard. This required an advanced grasp of hydraulics, applying principles of volume and flow that were remarkably sophisticated for their time. The placement of public wells and conduits was equally calculated. They were positioned to serve specific neighborhoods, their locations determined by the invisible geometry of watersheds and underground springs, forming a hidden hydraulic grid that underlay the entire urban structure. This mathematical foresight extended to industry. Tanneries and fulling mills, which required vast amounts of water, were strategically placed downstream at carefully chosen intervals along the river. This was an early form of environmental zoning, a deliberate use of distance and flow to prevent these necessary but polluting industries from contaminating the clean water supply for those living upstream. This entire network of channels, wells, and drains was an unseen masterpiece of urban mathematics, essential for public health and economic function. And just as water followed these calculated paths, so too did the goods that fueled the city's wealth, moving along the carefully planned networks of trade. The flow of goods into the city was as meticulously planned as the flow of water. A town's prosperity depended on trade, and the placement of its gates was a masterstroke of economic geometry. These fortified entrances were not scattered evenly around the defensive perimeter. Instead, each gate was a calculated investment, positioned to intercept a major overland trade route, a vital river ford, or a key bridge. The road leading from that gate into the city was then engineered as a direct commercial funnel. Its angle was deliberately set to guide merchants' carts and their valuable cargo on the most efficient path straight to the marketplace. From above, this system created a star-like pattern of primary arteries, all converging on the economic heart. Even the distance from a gate to the central square could be standardized, a subtle trick to streamline toll collection and market regulation. Every merchant knew exactly how far they had to travel, and where they would pay their dues, creating a predictable and controlled economic environment. This entire structure was a principle of urban economics literally set in stone, ensuring that wealth was channeled efficiently into the city's core. To witness this economic geometry in its purest, most intentional form, we must leave behind the organically grown towns and step into the world of planned communities, settlements built from scratch on a ruler-straight blueprint. The Bastides of southwestern France stand as a testament to deliberate design, their rigid grids imposed upon the feudal landscape like a statement of intent. Founded in the 13th and 14th centuries, these new towns were not the product of slow, organic growth. They were blueprints of social and economic ambition, drawn with ruler and compass on parchment before a single stone was laid. At first glance, their gridiron street plan appears to be a simple, even simplistic, revival of classical order, but this geometry was far from simple. It was a sophisticated mathematical instrument for creating a new kind of community. Every element was calculated, beginning with the central marketplace. This square was not merely a convenient open space. It was the geometric and commercial anchor of the entire settlement, its dimensions precisely calculated to a specific ratio. The streets were laid out to meet at perfect right angles, creating a matrix of perfectly uniform building plots. This was not just about neatness, it was a form of social engineering. By giving each settler a plot of land identical in size and shape, the founders offered a powerful promise of equality and transparent property rights. This mathematical fairness was a powerful law, drawing merchants and craftsmen to these new territories. The grid itself became a tool for defense, as the straight, wide streets allowed for rapid mustering of militia and clear lines of sight for patrols. It also stimulated trade by making the marketplace instantly accessible from every corner of town, ensuring that goods and commerce flowed with maximum efficiency. In the Bastide, we see geometry used as a conscious instrument to build a stable, prosperous, and defensible society from the ground up. This planned order offers a stark contrast to another, far more mystical form of urban mathematics that emerged just a few centuries later. Yet the rigid grids of the Bastides represent only one branch of medieval urban mathematics. Another, more ambitious model was taking shape in the minds of architects and philosophers, a design so perfect it often remained trapped on parchment. This was the ideal of the circular city. In countless medieval manuscripts and theoretical treatises, we find meticulous plans for perfectly round urban centers, their geometry a direct echo of the cosmos itself. Thinkers like Leon Battista Alberti argued that the circle was the most defensible and beautiful shape, a symbol of unity and divine perfection that should be reflected in the layout of a perfect community. These plans are breathtaking in their symmetry. Imagine a city laid out like a giant wheel. Major avenues would radiate outward from a central citadel or main square, like the spokes of that wheel, dividing the urban space into uniform sectors. Connecting these spokes were a series of concentric ring roads, creating a web of pathways that allowed for efficient movement from the bustling periphery directly into the powerful heart. This radial geometry created a clear and deliberate social hierarchy. The most important civic and religious buildings occupied the central core, while artisanal and agricultural zones were allocated to the outer rings, a spatial representation of the community's structure. Analyzing these theoretical blueprints reveals a profound desire to impose a celestial order onto the earthly landscape, an ambition that pushed the very boundaries of contemporary mathematics and surveying. But this perfect geometry, for all its intellectual beauty, soon encountered an immovable obstacle. The ideal circle, drawn with such precision on a flat sheet of vellum, had to confront the real world's hills, valleys, and winding rivers. The perfect city, in the end, was a shape for the mind, not the land. The perfect circle of the theoretical city was a beautiful idea, but the medieval landscape was a living, breathing reality of hills, valleys, and winding rivers. True planning genius was revealed not in ignoring these features, but in weaving them directly into the urban mathematical code. Rather than flattening a hill, planners would carve a series of terraced streets into its slopes. This created a stunning three-dimensional geometry that served multiple purposes. From a defensive standpoint, each ascending terrace became a natural rampart, forcing any attacker to fight uphill while exposed to defenders above. For daily life, these terraces solved the critical problem of drainage, channeling rainwater efficiently downward and away from homes and food stores. A river was rarely treated as a barrier to be crossed at a single, convenient point. Instead, it was integrated as a central axis for the entire city's growth. The placement of a bridge was a momentous decision, a strategic node that would pull the entire street network toward it. Roads would bend and curve to meet these bridges at the most effective angles, creating focal points for trade and community. The city's layout would often follow the land's elevation lines, a practice that resulted in those famously curving streets that feel so organic to walk. This was not a surrender to chaos, but a brilliant negotiation between an ideal geometric form and an unyielding physical context. It demonstrated a fluid, applied mathematics that respected the unique spirit of every location. This sophisticated adaptation was only possible because of the surprisingly advanced tools and techniques used by the medieval surveyor. The medieval surveyor's task was one of profound trust, translating lines on a parchment into the permanent stone and soil of a new community. His toolkit was elegantly simple, built not on complex machinery but on an unshakable faith in geometry. The most vital tools were the measuring rope, carefully treated to resist stretching, and the calibrated rod, often a local standard like the perch. But the true marvel was the groma, a deceptively simple instrument for sighting perfect right angles. It consisted of a cross-shaped frame suspended from a staff, with a plumb bob hanging from the end of each arm. By aligning two opposite bobs with a starting stake, the surveyor could sight along the other two to place a new stake at a perfect 90-degree angle. This was the foundational act of urban creation. The most common application of this principle was the 3-4-5 triangle method, a direct use of the Pythagorean theorem. A rope would be knotted into a loop with 12 equal segments. By pegging down the knot between the third and fourth segments, then stretching the rope so that the sides measured 3, 4, and 5 units respectively, the surveyor guaranteed a perfect right angle at the corner between the 3 and 4 unit sides. This hands-on geometry was the engine of the entire urban plan. Every time you see a medieval market square with strikingly straight sides, or a row of Burgage plots meeting a main street at a uniform perpendicular, you are witnessing the legacy of the groma and the knotted rope. Archaeological digs consistently reveal this hidden precision, with foundation trenches and property boundaries adhering to angles and dimensions that betray this methodical, mathematical approach. Yet for these master builders, numbers and shapes were never merely practical. They were a language, a way of encoding cosmic truths into the very streets where people lived their daily lives. For the master builders of these cities, mathematics was a sacred language, and every number held a secret weight. The dimensions of a cathedral were not just a matter of architectural stability, they were a theological argument written in stone. This symbolic world view extended far beyond individual buildings, imprinting itself onto the very layout of the entire urban center. A city could become a physical representation of a perfect cosmic order, a diagram of belief made real for its inhabitants to walk through every single day. The number 12, for instance, carried the powerful resonance of the 12 apostles. In some towns, this was not a vague inspiration but a literal blueprint, resulting in 12 main streets radiating from a central church, or 12 distinct districts organized around the city's core. To live there was to be constantly, subtly reminded of a foundational story, your daily navigation a silent recitation of faith. Similarly, the number 7, associated with divine perfection and the 7 days of creation, could dictate the number of a city's gates or its major parish churches. Each passage through a gate or attendance at a service became a reaffirmation of that symbolic structure. This was a world where the circle, as we have seen, represented the eternal and divine, while the square firmly grounded a community in the earthly realm. The very act of founding a city often began with a ceremonial marking of these two shapes, intersecting the celestial circle with the terrestrial square to create a sacred center. This symbolic mathematics infused the urban landscape with a profound layer of meaning that transcended mere practicality. It created a city that was not just a place to live, but a continuous statement of belief, an environment designed to elevate the human spirit. And this symbolic structure often aligned perfectly with the grand clockwork of the heavens, as the city's sacred geometry reached beyond the earth to connect with the cosmos itself. The city's sacred geometry did not stop at its walls, but reached upward to engage the cosmos itself. Beyond the symbolic numbers and shapes, the very orientation of a city could be locked into a celestial pattern. The most direct evidence for this is found in the alignment of cathedrals, where the high altar was often positioned so that the first light of the winter solstice sunrise would travel the full length of the nave, a dramatic infusion of light on the year's darkest day. But this principle of astronomical alignment could govern the entire urban plan. Imagine a main thoroughfare laid out not for convenience, but to point directly toward the rising point of a specific, revered star on the feast day of the town's patron saint. A citizen walking that street on that morning would be walking a path illuminated by both faith and astronomy. Even the placement of city gates could be a calculated act, their archways framing the setting sun precisely on the spring or autumn equinox. This was more than spectacle, it was a profound statement of harmony. It wove the city into the fabric of the universe, making the urban environment a living microcosm of a divinely ordered cosmos. Every solar event and stellar cycle was mirrored in the stone and streets below, a constant, silent reminder of the connection between the human community and the heavens. This same search for cosmic harmony expressed itself in a different mathematical language, one that governed the very proportions of the buildings that defined the city's skyline. This proportional harmony was not left to chance, but was a deliberate application of the same mathematical systems used to raise the great cathedrals. The very same golden ratio that defined the spiral of a seashell and the soaring height of a nave was also used to determine the ideal relationship between a street's width and the height of the houses lining it. A street that was too narrow felt cramped and dark, while one that was too wide felt exposed and barren. But when the width of the street and the height of the buildings were set in a pleasing ratio, perhaps 1:1 or 1:2, the result was a space that felt both protective and uplifting, a perfect vessel for daily life. This principle of harmonic ratios, some even derived from the intervals of musical chords, created a visual rhythm along the streets, a cadence that the eye could follow. This mathematical conversation extended to the city's major open spaces. The size of the bustling market square was often deliberately proportioned to the more solemn cathedral plaza, creating a visual and symbolic relationship between the city's commercial heart and its spiritual soul. Even if these spaces were built centuries apart, they spoke the same proportional language, creating a deep, underlying coherence. This is why an organically grown medieval city, despite its winding lanes, so often feels like a single, unified work of art. It is not the uniformity of a grid, but the consistency of a shared mathematical grammar, applied by generations of builders who understood that beauty was a matter of measure. And the key to implementing this grammar across an entire city was the use of a single, standardized unit of measurement. A town's entire existence could be measured with a single, carefully kept wooden rod. This was the perch or the rod, the fundamental module from which a community was physically constructed. These local units were the DNA of urban planning, a tangible standard agreed upon by lords, merchants, and masons alike. The width of your Burgage plot frontage was not 10 feet, it was precisely 2 perches. The main market square was not a vaguely large space, it was 20 perches by 40. This shared metrology created a profound, built-in consistency. A builder from a nearby village arriving with his own set of tools would already understand the proportional language of the new town's streets and properties. This was a mathematics made manifest in the physical world, a system that ensured every element from the grandest church to the humblest workshop related to every other in a coherent, scalable way. By studying the surviving dimensions of these ancient structures, we can work backwards to discover the original unit of measure, when the widths of a row of houses all prove to be simple multiples of one consistent length. We have found the perch that ruled that town. This reverse engineering reveals the invisible grid of local measurement that underlies the seemingly free-flowing urban form. It is the concrete key that unlocks the abstract principles of sacred geometry and defensive calculation. To see this entire system operating at its most magnificent and complex, we must now turn our gaze to a city that seems to defy all order, a place where water replaces stone as the primary street. The next chapter of our journey takes us to the labyrinth of Venice. London offers a masterclass in emergent mathematics, a city that grew not from a single blueprint but from countless individual decisions, yet produced a deeply intelligent design. Its streets form a complex web, yet when you trace the major routes, a hidden polycentric structure appears. Roads do not wander aimlessly. They converge with purpose on powerful focal points, like the great bulk of St. Paul's Cathedral and the vital artery of London Bridge. This created not one single center, but several overlapping radial patterns, a geometry of pilgrimage, power, and commerce etched into the landscape by centuries of footsteps and cartwheels. Even the seemingly chaotic widths of the streets obeyed an underlying logic. They were not random. The most common measurements corresponded to the space needed for 2 carts to pass, or to the deliberate gaps left as fire breaks after the city's great conflagrations. This was a form of mathematical evolution, where practical necessity slowly refined the urban form into its most efficient shape. Along the River Thames, this pragmatic intelligence is even more apparent. The wharves were not scattered randomly along the bank. Their placement was a precise calculation of the river's tidal flow, ensuring that ships could be loaded and unloaded safely at different water levels. This created a linear, mathematically optimized interface between the city and its source of wealth, a continuous engine of trade. London proves that a city can be profoundly mathematical without a master planner, its order emerging from the accumulated wisdom of generations, a layered and living urban form. This organic complexity stands in quiet contrast to the serene and deliberate order found just a short distance away within the walls of a medieval monastery. Within the monastery's walls, we find the medieval mind's ideal of order perfected. These communities were not simply built, they were engineered for a life of devotion and discipline. their layouts a direct physical manifestation of a spiritual rule. The classic Benedictine plan is a masterpiece of functional geometry, a self-contained world arranged with mathematical precision. At its heart lies the cloister, a perfect square or rectangular garden courtyard enclosed by covered walkways. This is the central processor of monastic life. To one side stands the great church, its altar the spiritual pole of the entire complex. Directly opposite, the refectory where the community eats in silence. Along another side, the chapter house for daily meetings and the dormitory where the monks sleep. Each building relates to the others through a system of precise right angles and symmetrical arrangements, creating a sequence of spaces that guides the daily routine. Moving from prayer to meals to work to rest, a monk followed a path through this architectural diagram, his life given rhythm and order by the very stones beneath his feet. This layout was a brilliant solution to the challenges of communal living, facilitating silent, efficient movement while enforcing a clear hierarchy from the most sacred spaces, like the church, to the more practical areas like the kitchens and workshops. The influence of this disciplined blueprint echoes far beyond the abbey walls. Can you see its legacy in the quadrangles of Oxford and Cambridge, those scholarly communities designed for contemplation and structured life? The monastic plan was a prototype, a proof of concept for using geometry to shape a perfect society. And at the core of this perfect society was a radical, forward-thinking principle that would reshape cities for centuries. This was a profound concern for public health. The narrowness of a medieval street was not just a defensive feature, it was a public health calculation. Without any knowledge of microbes, planners intuitively understood that sunlight was a powerful cleanser. Many towns had building codes that legally mandated a minimum width for new streets, a rule designed with one simple goal: to ensure that the sun's rays could penetrate all the way down to the cobblestones at ground level, even during the shorter days of winter. This daily infusion of light helped to dry out the persistent damp that could lead to illness, a primitive but effective form of urban hygiene. The very orientation of these thoroughfares was also a matter of careful planning. Major streets were frequently aligned to act as wind channels, funneling the prevailing breezes through the urban core. This natural ventilation system was essential for clearing the heavy smoke from countless hearths and forges, and for dispersing what people of the time called miasmas, the foul airs they believed carried disease. This was a geometry of breath, a deliberate design to let the city itself exhale. This same mathematical foresight governed what happened to the city's waste. The placement of public latrines and garbage middens was never arbitrary. They were strategically located on the outskirts of neighborhoods, consistently positioned downhill and downwind from the main residential areas. The intricate network of drainage channels that ran beneath these streets was not just dug haphazardly. Engineers calculated precise gradients, ensuring that rainwater and waste would flow continuously away from homes and toward designated collection points or rivers, following the natural slope of the land in a carefully managed system. This entire sanitary calculus, while basic by our standards, represents a profound and proactive use of spatial mathematics. It was an attempt to manage the invisible threats of the urban environment, to create a landscape that actively worked to preserve the health of its inhabitants. And just as this geometry was applied to care for the physical body, a parallel and equally sophisticated design logic was being used to construct spaces for the mind and the human spirit. The city's geometry was not merely a static plan, but a dynamic stage. On feast days, its streets transformed into a vast, open-air theater for religious processions and royal entries. The path a procession took was never a random walk. It was a meticulously scripted narrative, a story told through the deliberate sequence of urban spaces. The route would unfurl from the cathedral doors, winding its way to pass directly in front of the town hall, the guild halls, and the mansions of the most powerful families. This was a journey through a landscape of authority, reinforcing the social and spiritual hierarchy with every step the marchers took. At key points along this ceremonial path, the urban fabric would deliberately open up. A street would suddenly widen into a small plaza, creating a natural theater for a staged biblical play, a public sermon, or a blessing from a passing bishop. The architecture itself was designed to amplify these moments. Balconies and oriel windows overlooking these spaces became privileged boxes for the elite to watch and be seen, while the common folk gathered in the open area below. The most powerful effect was one of sequenced revelation. Imagine moving with the crowd through a dim, tightly packed lane, the sounds of chanting echoing off the close walls. Then you turn a final corner and are released into the breathtaking expanse of the cathedral square, the full glory of the west facade towering above you. This transition from compression to grandeur was a calculated emotional experience, using space itself to inspire awe and reinforce devotion. This theatrical geometry was a tool of immense power, choreographing the community's shared identity and instructing them in the doctrines of their faith through the very streets they called home. It also served a sterner purpose, for the same stages that hosted celebrations could also frame public demonstrations of justice, where the consequences of transgressing societal laws were put on full display. This conscious design for human experience marks a pivotal moment of change in how we understand these urban spaces. The cannonball shattered the old geometry of defense. The high, thin walls that had defined the medieval city for centuries were suddenly obsolete, vulnerable to the explosive power of new artillery. In their place, a new form emerged from the drafting tables of military engineers, the Star Fort. This was not a simple polygon, but a complex star-shaped structure of low, thick, earthen ramparts and sharply projecting bastions. Its geometry was a direct and brutal application of mathematics to the problem of survival. Each point of the star was a calculated artillery platform, designed to provide flanking fire along the face of the adjacent wall, ensuring that no part of the fortification was left undefended. The entire design was a masterwork of angles and sightlines, a geometric web meant to trap an attacking army in a deadly crossfire. This new martial shape did not just protect the city, it began to dictate its outer form, forcing the urban layout to conform to its demanding radial logic. This shift in defensive thinking was part of a much larger intellectual revolution, one that was simultaneously redefining the very purpose of the city itself. The humanist thinkers of the Renaissance, men like Leon Battista Alberti, were looking back beyond the Middle Ages to the writings of Vitruvius and the ideals of ancient Rome. They championed a new urban vision, one where the city was not primarily a diagram of divine order, but a setting for human achievement. The ideal was no longer a reflection of the celestial sphere, but of the perfectly proportioned human body, extended outwards into the urban plan. This philosophy prized perspective, symmetry, and ideal forms above the organic adaptations of the medieval past. You can see this new intention in the public squares that were built or redesigned during this period. The Piazza della Signoria in Florence or the Piazza San Marco in Venice were not simply open spaces left over between buildings. They were conceived as unified architectural compositions, their proportions carefully calculated, their facades designed to present a harmonious front to the viewer. The space itself became a work of art, a deliberate stage for civic life. This transition marks a profound moment in the history of urban design. It is the point where the symbolic, theological mathematics of the Middle Ages began to blend with the more secular, human-centric mathematics of the modern era. The sacred geometry that placed a cathedral's altar to catch the solstice sun now shared the city with a geometry of perspective that made a palace appear more grand and powerful. The stage was now set for the next great act, the sweeping, overpowering geometries of the Baroque period, where urban space would be weaponized to express absolute power. But what became of the intricate, layered mathematical soul of the medieval city? Did it simply vanish beneath the ruler-straight boulevards of a new age? The straight boulevards of the Baroque era and the rigid grids of the Industrial Revolution could not erase the medieval city's mathematical soul. Its core principles were simply repurposed for a new age. Look at the grand radial avenues of Washington, D.C. converging on the Capitol building. This is not a new idea, but a monumental evolution of the same polycentric logic that guided pilgrims toward a cathedral spire. The modern concept of a green belt, a protected ring of parkland surrounding a city, is a direct conceptual descendant of the clear boundary once marked by fortified walls, defining where the urban realm ended and the countryside began. Even our contemporary push for walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods where people can live, work, and shop within a short distance finds a powerful prototype in the medieval Burgage plot. That long, narrow strip of land was the original live work unit, with a shop facing the street and a home, garden, and workshop stretching out behind it. This integrated model fostered a profound sense of community and reduced the need for lengthy travel, a lesson in urban sustainability we are now relearning. In the late 19th century, visionaries like Ebenezer Howard explicitly looked back to the scale and social cohesion of medieval market towns when they proposed their Garden City movement, seeking to escape the smog and overcrowding of industrial centers by recreating a more human-centered environment. The medieval approach, a unique fusion of pragmatic geometry, symbolic meaning, and an intimate human scale, offers timeless wisdom for building cities that are not just efficient, but truly vibrant and alive. To fully appreciate their genius, however, we must first clear away the stubborn misconceptions that have long obscured their work. For centuries, we have neatly divided cities into two categories: the messy, unplanned medieval town and the orderly, geometric Renaissance city. This simple story is a profound distortion of history. The truth is that medieval urban centers were anything but unplanned. They were masterpieces of intentional design, but their guiding principles were fundamentally different from the rigid, top-down grids that would later become fashionable. Their mathematics was not the simple geometry of the drawing board, but a complex, adaptive system, more akin to a living language than to a static blueprint. This was a fractal logic, where the same patterns of division and connection repeated themselves at different scales, from the grand sweep of a processional route down to the modular dimensions of a single Burgage plot. The winding street that seems to meander without purpose is often a brilliant solution to multiple challenges at once, cleverly navigating a steep hill, breaking an invader's line of sight, and guiding water runoff all in one elegant curve. When we label this intricate web as chaos, we reveal our own failure to understand its language. It is a system that optimized for resilience, for symbolic meaning, and for a deeply human scale of life. To see this intelligence is to liberate ourselves from a false hierarchy that places the straight line above the thoughtful curve. It allows us to look at the archaeological footprints of these communities not as evidence of a bygone disorder, but as the fossilized record of a sophisticated and highly successful urban philosophy. So how do we move from seeing a pattern to proving a principle? The evidence is not found in a single document, but painstakingly pieced together from the ground itself. Archaeological excavations are our most direct window into the medieval planner's mind. When researchers carefully uncover the foundation trenches of a long-vanished house, they are not just finding a building's footprint. They are reading the original surveyor's lines. These trenches often reveal property boundaries that run in perfectly straight lines and meet at precise right angles, even on a curving street, proving the use of tools like the groma to lay out a hidden, modular grid. This physical evidence on the ground is then cross-referenced with the meticulous details found in surviving property records and town charters. These ancient documents often specify dimensions in those local units like perches and rods, describing a Burgage plot as having a frontage of 2 perches and a depth of 12. When the measurements from the parchment match the trenches in the earth, the case for intentional design becomes undeniable. We can then look up from the soil to the standing buildings that have endured for centuries. The consistent proportions of house frames, the rhythmic spacing of structures along a street, and the deliberate alignment of a building's facade with its neighbor all speak to a shared understanding of measurement and spatial order. Even the most schematic of historical maps, when analyzed not for their cartographic accuracy but for their depiction of spatial relationships, can reveal the overarching geometric logic that guided the town's growth. Today, our ability to see these patterns has been revolutionized by technology. Using geographic information systems, researchers can input the entire street plan of a medieval city and analyze it with mathematical rigor. The software can calculate the angles of every street intersection, revealing a surprising prevalence of specific angles that defy random chance. It can measure the areas of thousands of plots, demonstrating that they cluster around a few standardized sizes. This high-tech analysis unveils a hidden skeleton of geometric order beneath the skin of the city, confirming what the physical evidence has always suggested. This convergence of proof, from the subtle clues in the dirt to the grand patterns revealed by satellites, allows us to state with confidence that the medieval town was a calculated creation. Its beauty was not an accident, but the product of a sophisticated and widely understood mathematical language. Their legacy is a hidden curriculum in the art of building a living world. The medieval planner's genius lay in a refusal to separate the practical from the sacred, the economic from the symbolic. Every calculation, from the width of a street to the angle of a wall, served a constellation of purposes. This was a mathematics of wholeness, a tool to weave defense, trade, worship, and daily life into a single, resilient fabric. It was not about imposing a perfect, abstract grid, but about skillfully adapting ideal forms to the stubborn truths of a hillside or a riverbank. Most profoundly, it was a mathematics of meaning where the number of a city's gates could echo the days of creation, and the path of a processional route could tell a story of faith. This holistic vision, where numbers and shapes were a language connecting the human to the cosmic, is perhaps their most vital lesson for our own time. In an era of sprawling, often soulless urban development, their approach reminds us that a city's ultimate purpose is not merely efficiency, but to foster community, inspire the spirit, and connect us to a story larger than ourselves. The true treasure in these ancient street patterns is not just the geometry we can measure, but the wisdom we have yet to fully reclaim. Our journey through these geometrically charged landscapes reveals a hidden intelligence that challenges our modern assumptions. We often equate mathematical planning with rigid grids and straight lines, but the medieval mind understood a more fluid, adaptive calculus. These were not haphazard settlements but complex, calculated environments where mathematics served as the silent language of power, faith, commerce, and community. Every decision, from the proportional harmony of a single Burgage plot to the celestial alignment of a cathedral spire, was part of a grand, intentional design. This was a world where numbers and shapes were not abstract concepts but living tools used to build resilience, foster social bonds, and connect the human realm to the cosmic order. To see this is to fundamentally change how we view these ancient spaces. Understanding these principles does more than satisfy historical curiosity. It provides a rich toolkit of ideas for our own time. As we grapple with contemporary urban challenges related to soulless sprawl, environmental sustainability, and the loss of community, the medieval city offers profound lessons. Its emphasis on human scale, mixed-use neighborhoods, and integration with the natural landscape presents a compelling alternative model for creating vibrant, livable urban environments. The next time you walk through an old European town, remember to look beyond the charming cobblestones and half-timbered facades. See the magnificent mathematical blueprint laid down centuries ago, a testament to a forgotten science that wove together the practical and the sacred. If this exploration of hidden urban order has fascinated you, please subscribe for more journeys into the lost sciences of the past. We would love to hear which medieval city you find most mathematically intriguing in the comments below. The stone arch of the Narbonnaise Gate does not open onto a straight, welcoming boulevard. Instead, the path immediately forces a sharp turn, a deliberate kink in the urban fabric designed to shatter any invader's momentum and eliminate a clear line of sight from the outside world. This is your first encounter with Carcassonne's defensive calculus, a principle set in stone before you take 10 steps inside. Following the main thoroughfare, the Rue Croix-Meyréville, you are being guided by an invisible hand. Its width is not an accident of history. It is a carefully proportioned channel, wide enough for commerce and ceremony, yet narrow enough to be easily barricaded. Its dimensions a balance struck by generations of pragmatic planners. This street does not wander, it processes with intention, drawing you inevitably toward the heart of power, the citadel looming ahead. Then, the compression of the street suddenly gives way. The buildings fall back, and you emerge into an open space before the Basilica of Saints Nazarius and Celsus. This geometric void is a theatrical pause in the urban narrative, a calculated emptiness whose sole purpose is to frame the sacred structure, forcing your gaze upward to its towering presence and emphasizing its monumental importance in the life of the city. Look out from the ramparts now, and the full defensive genius unfolds. The concentric rings of walls are not a simple circle, but a complex polygon. Each straight section between towers is a chord of a vast, invisible circle, and each projecting tower is a meticulously placed artillery platform. From these vantage points, defenders could unleash a devastating, interlocking field of fire, ensuring that no patch of ground below was safe for an attacker. This is the polygonal defensive ideal made breathtakingly real, and within these mighty walls, even the seemingly chaotic jumble of houses and shops obeys a hidden order. The irregular shapes of the residential plots are not random. They are the result of centuries of subdivision within a modular system based on the local measurement standard, each plot a unique variation on a shared mathematical theme. Carcassonne is far more than a beautifully preserved ruin. It is a frozen moment of medieval mathematical genius, a perfect symphony where the geometries of defense, faith, and daily life were composed into a single, resilient masterpiece.